Unit 17, Part 12. So back in Part 1 or 2 of Unit 17, and also in Part 10, around 7 minutes, 20 seconds in, I was talking about the big advantage that relational logic has over monadic predicate logic was that relational predicate logic more accurately captures and expresses the actual logical structure of English. Right, I was talking about ontology, using the word ontology, speaking about the linguistic being of English and how we capture more of the actual logical structure of English in our relational predicate logic. When you say Mike likes Jill, right, this is properly a relation that you are expressing, so it would be more accurately, more truly captured or expressed with a two-place predicate rather than just a one-place predicate. Okay, and I've gestured or mentioned a couple of times, whenever I spoke of that, I pointed to page 329, which is in this section 4, and here is where she says, very bottom of 328, many different kinds of phrases can be symbolized by using relational functions plus quantifiers. And she goes through these different expressions in English, things like transitive verbs and comparatives and so on, all the expressions in English whose proper logical form is only really captured or expressed in relational logic, right? The kind of English expressions that you should use when we're doing relational predicate logic. You should use 2 or 3 place predicates plus quantifiers, if required, to properly express their logical form. Okay, and so I always gestured at that in those when I was discussing. I was always saying that to understand that, you really need to get that frame that you need to be thinking about the relation between logic and English and why we're doing this motivation for why we're doing this extra logic to capture more of that logical structure. So I don't want to say too much more about this page, this page 329, but right, clearly, so transitive verbs in English, those are verbs which have direct objects. Those are the kind of verbs which should properly receive, right, to be true to that linguistic expression, should properly receive relational predicates, right? To give examples, top of 329 now. X loves Y, X kicked Y, X delights Y, X knows Y, X believes Y. Transitive verbs, they have a direct object, right? So it's properly a relation between a subject and most of these cases, all of these cases, a subject and the direct object of the verb. The thing you know, it's a relation. When you love, it's you loving a particular individual, right? When you're kicking something, right? Knowing, you know something, believing, etc. She runs through paragraph by paragraph various different examples of expression. So comparatives are very obvious. Beth is taller than Jill. So is taller than, X is taller than Y. X is faster than Y. These are comparatives, usually indicated by the ER ending. Right? These are obviously two-place, right? To be taller than something, it's a relation, right? It is a relation, you give it a two-place predicate. Genitives and possessives, right? So genitives, the dog's breakfast, dog apostrophe S, it's the breakfast of the dog, right? So genitives and also possessives, these also should get relational predicates. That you should keep in mind for this one. So genitives, right? Genitives expressed with the word of in the expression, the dog of, the breakfast of the dog, right? Here, this will be any student who reads books will enjoy some of his or her courses. Courses of the student, right? That's a genitive, okay? So that's going to get a relational predicate, okay? So just to connect for you, second full paragraph of 329, talking about genitives and possessive, and this example, which is the one she runs through on page 331 and 2, which we'll do well now, basically. Prepositional phrases, she goes through these. She teaches you to be on the lookout for expressions like a or an, where it indicates that an existential quantifier is called for, right? What did we do before? We did Joe has brothers, or there are brothers of Joe, whatever it was. When we rephrase that, we rephrase that sentence. There are brothers of Joe's, or was it? John has brothers. John has brothers. We captured that as an existential. It's asserting the existence of John's brothers. Anyway, okay, so let's do this one so now moving into the last section of the chapter, section 5, symbolizing English sentences, starting 331. And we'll go through this. Let me point you to the text that I've referred to a few times. On 328, okay, there's this italicized passage on 328 here, where my middle finger is, which is important, right? This is really crucial advice for symbolizing English sentences with this kind of complexity. Right, you should get in the habit of first paraphrasing the sentence to be symbolized, indicating the quantifier by the phrase for every x or for some x, and then stating the subject and predicate functions in terms of the variable x. Okay, we sort of did that a bit in the previous part, where we had rephrasings of the subject and predicate, right? And this next part is also important. You will then be able to see more clearly what needs to be done to symbolize the subject and predicate phrases. Okay, that's on 328, and expressed again on 331 as she's beginning on this example, right? She works through this sentence to be symbolized, this problem. Okay, and she says, how are we going about doing it? Let's look back at that advice. So here she says, right here, there, right, 328, sorry, it's 331, right. So the subject, she's sort of started on it, she said the subject phrase, a student who read books, blah, blah, blah. So far this should be a piece of cake. The paraphrase of the sentence, which will tell us what we need to do to symbolize the various parts, is, and then she has that sentence, the isolated sentence there. For any x if blah, 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 which we'll get to as we actually go through it. But see how she's just following that advice is what I want to point out. So paraphrase the sentence with the variable, using the variable to express the subject and predicate, and that paraphrase is what you then, what makes available the actual symbolization, right? It's easier to read from the paraphrase, right? The actual symbols that you put down in the symbolizing. Okay, so this will be the final translation. We'll get to how we get through it from this. So remember the strategy. 1, identify the overall form and put that overall form down first. Okay, so that's what I've used a red. Right. Any student who reads books will enjoy some of his or her classes and will learn something. You must grasp that first and foremost as an A form categorical. It's universal inclusion, which means its form is just what's given in the red here. The universal with a conditional as the major operator of the propositional function that is bound by the universal quantifier, okay? So that's what we put down first. We put down the overall form, boom, boom, and we're going to paraphrase the subject and then translate it to this, right? But crucially, because we put the form down in place already, all that symbolization that results is going to go here, right? It's got to go here as the antecedent of the conditional, and same thing for here. We're going to paraphrase the predicate phrase, right? Get out all the quantifiers, so on and so forth, but it's going to be plugged, all those symbols that come out are going to, the result, they're going to be plugged in as the consequent of the conditional, right? So it remains, it keeps, it maintains its A form through the partial symbolizations. Okay, what's the subject? Noun plus all modifiers. Student, any student, or we could ask, where's the verb, right? Where does the main verb, it's where the subject ends, predicate begins. Any student who reads books will enjoy some of his or her classes and will learn something, okay? So will, the ones in the subject class, will, blah, 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 that's the verb. What's the verb, right? So, will enjoy, they will enjoy. So you're predicating of all those in the subject class that they will enjoy some of their classes and also learn something. So the subject then is students who read books, right? And it's any, of course, universal quantifier, so that's whatever for all x. So now, right, I would write here, right, for all x, my overall form is there. And let me do, right, so now I'm doing that advice 328 and 331, right? The paraphrase of the sentence, which will tell us what we need to do, the symbolization in the various parts. So you're paraphrasing the subject and predicate phrase. How does that go? I won't write it down, it just says, X is a student, right? For all X, so I'm paraphrasing, so my overall sentence now has this form, because I've recognized that as an A form, so now I say, for all X, if, okay, now how does the subject read? It's, X is a student and X reads books, okay? And that becomes, so X is a student and X read books. First question, what's the major operator? It's a conjunction, it's the and, right? X is a student and X reads books, okay? X is a student, that's a simple monadic predicate, SX equals X is a student. So that's my first conjunct. My second conjunct is, because of that, and this goes with this, I'm missing and that goes with that, missing a bracket there. Note Klenk's advice, make sure all the brackets line up, pay attention to it. Right. Yes, that's pretty good there. So the red bracket ends with the red back bracket over there. Because the universal quantifier, the scope of it has to extend clear to the end, as she says here. All right, notice the predicate phrase. So it's X is a student and X reads books. Okay, X reads books. What kind of being is reading, right? Reading is a transitive verb, right? You read, well, sometimes. You can say, it's fine to say that you're just reading, but you read something, right? You're reading a particular thing. We're going to have RXY is a relation. You read some particular thing, and we're specifying that the student, the X, for all X is a student, and what else is true of X? There, X is a student and, X is still a student over here, and X reads books, right? So X, what am I saying logically? That X, the student, stands in the relation of reading to something, and that something is a book. Is a book, that is a one-place predicate, right? So I'm asserting the existence of these kinds of things which stand in the relation of reading to me, in that I read them, okay? Or the student reads them. So X is a student, and there does exist a Y such that Y is a book, and Y stands in the relation of being read by X, by that student. So that's how you say, logically, for all X, if X is a student who reads books, it becomes, there exists a Y such that Y is a book and X reads Y. We'll come back and do the predicate.